So I thought that song was a fitting warm-up song for our call today. If your lips are moving, then you're lying. So we are going to just go over some of the things that I liked in the book. I'd love to hear about what you liked in the book as well. I thought I would start off with a couple of interesting facts about lying, since we're talking about the honest truth about dishonesty. So first, and this isn't in the book, but I thought it would be interesting to add them. Children begin lying as early as, can you guess? How many years, how many months? So they found that 6 months old is when children start to lie. And they did this, Dr. Reddy at University of Portsmouth is the one who identified that there are 7 different types of deception used by toddlers specifically. And he did interviews with children and parents. Typically, deception begins at 6 months old. And can you guess what it is that children at 6 months old do to lie? Typically, they fake cry. And if you're a parent or you've ever babysat with a child, you know very well that children are very good at fake crying to get attention. So we lie from a very, very early age. Another interesting fact is that humans are not the only ones who lie. Gorillas, fish, birds, even orchids engage in deception of some kind because they do it to survive. And so they believe that lying is a survival mechanism that we've created to survive within our species. One of the biggest myths about lying, and I talk about this a lot in my courses, is that eye contact is a predictable way to see if someone's lying to you. Specifically, if someone has darty eyes, they're looking away or they're not making eye contact, then they are lying to you. And that is a huge myth. So it's also a myth that people look up to the left or up to the right when they lie. Typically, liars look you in the face more because they want to see if you believe them. So lying those myths about lying are really scary because then we can assume someone's lying to us even when they're telling the truth. Shifty eyes is just a sign of nervousness. Last one is, can you guess which profession does the best with lie detection? Is it law enforcement officials, customs agents, judges, FBI agents? So none of those professions perform better than average in detecting deception. In fact, the only population of people that perform better in detecting deception, which we can only do with about 54% accuracy, are prison inmates. I suppose it takes one to know one. So let's talk about some of my favorite parts of the book. And the first interesting thing that I was thinking about was this SMORC, simple model of rational crime. And I think that most of us think about SMORC, or a rational model for lying. We think about the benefit of committing the crime or lying and the probability of getting caught. And that's how we rationally weigh it out. But as Dan Ariely proves in his wonderful book, this is not actually what happens. We are not so rational in our head. We don't make pros and cons lists in our head before we lie. And for me, this was the first time I'd ever thought about. As you can tell, I'm recovering from a cold. So if I use incorrect grammar, that's why. I'll blame it on that. I never thought about lying in terms of a non-rational way, sort of the forces that are not rational that are driving our behavior. And I think that's what helps us figure out how we can get more honesty in our interactions. So the second aspect that I wanted to bring up was this idea of being mentally uncomfortable, seeing yourself as a liar or not. And that this all comes down to the fudge factor. And I love this idea of the fudge factor. I had never thought about lying before in this way, that we have a desire to get ahead, but we also have a desire to think of ourselves as a good person. And that when we're lying, these two things butt heads. They have a really hard time being able to rationalize being a good person and getting ahead. And so the fudge factor comes into play when we feel like we'll lie just a little bit, just to get a little bit of the advantage, but we still can think of ourselves as being a good person. And so I think the fudge factor helps us because this happens to us all the time. For example, I immediately thought of trick-or-treating when I read about the fudge factor. If you've ever been trick-or-treating at Halloween and you walk up to one of those houses that has a bowl in front of the door with a sign that says, "Take one piece of candy," that is like the worst trick on a child, because a child walks up to the door and they see this big bowl of candy, and the sign says very clearly, take just one. But it's so hard to take just one. So typically, if you watch kids, and when I was a kid, you would take one, maybe two candies. Maybe a really, really bad kid would take 3 or 4 kids. And every once in a while, once in a blue moon, a kid takes the entire bucket and dumps it into his own bag. I think that this is the perfect example of the fudge factor in action, that most people will cheat just a little bit. They take 2 or 3 pieces of candy. But of course, there are some people in the population who have no problem dumping the entire thing in their basket. What we hope is that most people fall in that little tiny fudge factor zone. They still want to think of themselves as a good person or as a good kid, and they still want to get Santa to bring them presents, so they don't take all of it. I think that that's the perfect example of the fudge factor in real life. I actually want to show a video. We're going to see if I can do it. See about screen sharing. I'm going to screen share it for you so you can see it. It's one of my favorite videos about lying, and I think it's a great example of this. So here I go. Here we go. I'm going to screen share with you. Are you ready? Okay. Here we go. And this is the perfect example of the fudge factor in action.
It turns out lying is the natural order of things. We put 15 high school kids into a tempting situation to see if they lie.
We told them we wanted to test the relationship between height and coordination.
That was in fact a lie.
First, we measured height. Next, we invited them to toss beanbags through 3 holes of decreasing size.
And to make it more interesting, we told them we'd pay them $3 for each beanbag they got through the smallest hole, $2 for the middle-sized, and $1 for the biggest hole.
And to make it tempting, we asked them to track their own scores.
And you see where we're going with this. But to keep it scientific, we used a hidden camera to watch what really happened.
Watch this kid. Here's his actual score. And listen to his report.
What's your score? 3 threes, 2 twos.
That's a 240% lie.
But this young man claimed that out of a possible $15, he had earned
16? All told, 80% of the subjects lied.
And the irony here is that most of these subjects had just finished a Bible study class. So what's going on? Are these just bad kids? Do we lie just because we can? Here's some BS you can use.
When we and others lie, we typically attribute it to a moral defect.
I do. I think either I'm evil or more likely he's evil. We watch others tell lies and we think they must just have a cankered soul.
The psychologist Albert Bandura suggests much of our problem isn't moral defect, but moral slumber. In other words, we're capable of making good moral choices, but we just aren't thinking about this choice as a moral one. We're morally asleep.
You know, this is a pretty big idea, because if it's true, we need to spend less time judging each other and more effort alerting each other. But would that work?
Next, we brought in 15 more kids and gave them the same instructions.
The only change this time was we asked them to promise to be honest. We assured them they were on their own, but invited them to indicate their commitment by signing an honor code. That's the moral wake-up call.
Now, watch what happens. Here's the star of the high school basketball team, a boy named Jake, and he scores. And he reports
6. He faces humiliation with honesty.
In this condition, the results were reversed. This time, 80% told the truth.
That's staggering. They traded money for morality willingly. So what's the point?
Many of our moral lapses aren't conscious, but mindless. It isn't that we compromise our conscience, it's that our conscience is asleep. It's left the building.
We can make the world a more moral place by simply judging less and talking more. We can assume others just aren't aware and give them and us a moral wake-up call.
A little nudge to invite them to bring values they already hold to a specific decision. But you have to do it in the right way.
Not a lecture, not a command, a polite reminder, preferably prior to the moment of decision.
All right. So I really like that video. They don't use any of the same terms that Dan Ariely uses, but I think it's extremely helpful to think about the reminder system, right? That if we're reminded of that honor code, that really helps us own up to our truth. I also loved, I don't know if anyone noticed the micro expression of contempt that basketball player showed when he announced his score, but I think he was very ashamed of his score, but he still battled through it and was honest. So this brings me into the factors that make us lie more and the factors that make us lie less. So summarizing what Ariely talked about is that the things that make us lie more are distance from cash. So tokens, credit cards, chips, representations of money make us feel like we're not actually stealing. It increases our fudge factor because we're like, it's tokens. It's not an actual representation of money. One really practical thing I could think of in this particular case is of course, using cash whenever you possibly can, but also garage sales. So if you're at a garage sale, one of the best things you can do to help people not steal from you is to label the price, put the label of the price on each item. So for example, if you have a mug and it says 25 cents on it, that person is directly connected with the price, the value. And so hopefully, I would think that would make them less likely to toss that mug in their purse and steal it from you. So I think assigning monetary value to things, including like music or digital assets, that I think could be a way to decrease the fudge factor when we're talking about the distance between money and value. How about what makes us lie less? Thank goodness there was much more in the book about this. So a couple of things. Honor codes, which we saw in that video. Having people sign honor codes, especially before they do anything. Reminding people of their morality and the need for honesty. So I was thinking about, I'm having a live event coming up, and I was actually thinking about not necessarily having everyone sign an honor code before the event, but stating at the beginning of the event, this is a safe space, or this is an honest space. I was even thinking about creating a banner that said honest space as people walked into the door, just as a test to see, do people think about honesty more often? Do they think about truth more often? I think the more that we put that present, the better. Having people take an oath. So when people state out loud the need for honesty, they're much less likely to cheat, especially on job interviews or anytime you're doing a question and answer with someone you really want them to be honest. I think this is the one that's the most useful. Now, you don't necessarily have to have them take an oath before a job interview. That would be a little awkward. But I do think that you can, at the very beginning of the interview, say, I hope that today you can be completely honest with me. Does that sound okay to you? And have them verbally agree, yes, of course, I'd love to be honest with you. It seems obvious, but I think that really hones people in on the fact that you want to have a transparent and honest interaction. It's a much softer way of having an oath. So just an idea. I'm going to try it on my next interview. The last takeaway on what makes people lie less is when people think they're being watched, they cheat less. That study that he had with the picture of the eyeball next to the free food, when people saw that eye, they felt like they were being watched more than when they just saw a picture of flowers. This one is a little bit harder. However, I do think that having oversight in your comments or in your forums is a great way to have people have the feeling of being watched or the feeling of accountability, which is always good no matter what you're doing. I loved when Ariely looked at IQ versus creativity. So in this section of the book, he wanted to know, do liars have higher IQ than non-liars? In other words, does it take more smarts to lie? And what he found is that liars do not have higher IQ. In fact, they are just more creative. And I thought this was really interesting because typically manipulative people who lie a lot, come up with really creative, strategic examples of how to lie or how to manipulate. So I thought this was a really helpful thing to think about when you're looking at creative people who are very manipulative, that actually it's their creativity that allows them to lie even more because they're able to come up with these advanced stories. It doesn't mean, by the way, that you should not hire creative people. We still love creative people, even though they're better at lying to us. That reminded me also of the example with the gorilla who blamed the baby for ripping the sink out of the wall. That was a very creative way of thinking of getting out of ripping the sink out of the wall. I don't know if anyone's seen that story, but there's a gorilla who was nursing and adopted a little human baby. They were doing experiments on it, and the gorilla had ripped the sink out of the wall. And then when the experimenter came back in the room and looked at the sink, the gorilla pointed at the baby like it was the baby who did it. So we get very creative on who we could blame for. The last thing I want to talk about is the what the hell effect. And this scares me. This was the chapter that scared me the most. Because for the most part, Ariely's book is actually, I think, quite positive. It gives me a lot of hope that if you remind people about optimism, if you remind them that they should be a good person, they'll lie less. But the what the hell effect really scared me. So the what the hell effect is when people who are already cheating a little bit feel like, oh, what the hell, I might as well cheat a lot. And this happened during the fake designer sunglass experiment, where he had people wear fake designer sunglasses and real designer sunglasses, and people who were wearing the fake designer sunglasses cheated way more. Because like, what the hell, I'm already wearing a fake, why not cheat even more? The most important thing I think for us to think about, and any suggestions are welcome, I'll check the chat in a little bit, is the broken windows theory applies to lying. The broken windows theory says that if there's one broken window in a neighborhood, then people feel like they can vandalize even more, and that you have to fix that window immediately to prevent any other from that slippery slope going downhill. I think it's the same thing with lying, that if there's one small lie, you notice that someone fudged on a number or lied about a reason to be late, and you know that's a lie, instead of just letting it go as a little lie, to honestly, calmly, and warmly talk to the person about that small lie. I think that if we address that lie, they don't get into the what the hell effect, that I've already lied once about being late, I might as well lie a bunch more or lie every day about being late. So I think that the way that we do that is to incorporate the broken windows theories in a kind way in our interactions the moment we catch a lie. The last interesting findings that I thought were notable was that liars do in fact feel guilty. That the more liars cheat on a task, the more electric shocks they end up giving themselves after the activity. So again, I think this is hopeful, right? That if we're going to lie, at least there's that guilt, that self-punishment that comes in afterwards, that we still feel like we weren't a good person and we have to punish ourselves for it. Now, I wish people would just stop lying in the first place, but at least we do feel guilt over it. I also liked which country lies the most, that there is no difference in lying across cultures. Whether you're in the US or Italy or Israel or China, you lie the same amount, but depending on your occupation, you could lie more. So the occupation that lied more than politicians, most people think it's politicians, were bankers. That made me really nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know which is worse, the people running our country or the people financing our country. But we do know that he found the bankers lie more than politicians. So now that we kind of covered the science of lying, I would love to hear how you plan on encouraging more honesty in your relationships, or what you think the most important takeaway from this book was. Anyone have anything to share on that? And I will check the chat as well.
I take it everyone can hear each other, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll be honest, the reason I picked through is I actually wanted to hear about if the book was worth reading, because there's so many books that I had to on my list of books that I want to read, and it sounds like this is definitely a one to get into.
Yeah.
So my questions would be around why, what do you get out of it, the book?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. So for me personally, my takeaways were that I need to speak about honesty more than just implied honesty. So I think that we go into a job interview and we assume that, of course, they're going to be honest, but actually demanding that honesty and calling out the honesty, even saying the word honesty or truth, I didn't realize how important that was. And I plan on integrating it into most areas of my business. Job interviews, website. So what do you have a business that you run, or are you thinking about personal?
No. It's so this is definitely on a personal level, but also on a business level. So I own a recruitment business in New Zealand. So, but I'm a migrant. I'm from South Africa and opened the business here in New Zealand. And the people that I do work with on a constant basis are people from all different countries. And you're talking about lying. Sometimes they do feel it's little white lies just to get their foot in the door. So it's very important to just cut through all of that and help them understand it's not necessary. So
Yeah.
I'm still looking for material to work through that, because I do feel that I guess my experience have helped me get through some of the lies out there, but some people are just so good.
I know.
And I have to be careful. But these types of books are important to me.
If you're working with a lot of people, which it sounds like you are in recruitment, then you can only do so much after you catch the lie. What I liked about this book is it's preventative. So a lot of the work that I do is like, once someone's lied, how do you spot it? And then what do you do? Whereas this book was more like, how do you prevent the lie in the first place? And I like that.
It says, where do I start with it? I mean, I engage with them before they even come out to New Zealand. I start engaging with them. So a lot of my communication lacks even inflection. It's just by email or written correspondence, and then it goes into other sorts of communication. So where do I start? That's the problem.
I think actually his book is a great place to start, because starting with the causes as opposed to the symptoms is always better. And I also think that it just helps us understand our own human behavior better. Like, for example, even like my own fudge factor, right? Like, for example, if I don't pay my parking the entire time of the time I'm going to be there, and I'm like, whatever, like I'm there for 20 minutes, like that's okay. And I'm like, wow, that was not the rational model. That was me like fudging it because I already paid for 2 hours. So even understand.
Okay. I'm definitely getting the book. Definitely getting it. It sounds like it's something worth reading.
Yeah. Anyone else have any takeaways they wanted to add? All right. Well, I want to end on one final note, which is that I think this book was incredibly optimistic. I think it showed us that we don't just lie for pure gain. We do truly think of ourselves and want to think of ourselves as good people. And so if we can tap into that and help people feel like a good person, not only does that help them feel better, but it also encourages honesty in all of our interactions. And I think that's a really, really good way to interact. So thanks for joining me today, guys. And I'm going to post this on my blog for everyone who wasn't able to attend, because we did it really last minute. And hopefully you will like the book if you haven't already read it, or you can read our summary that I'm going to post on the blog in the next few days.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.